the Enid Blyton Mystery Stories. The Mystery of Tally-Ho Cottage. One cold afternoon in January, 4 children, Larry, Daisy, Pip and Bets, and a dog called Buster, walked into the little railway station at Peterswood. The dog ran about happily, his tail wagging all the time. They were waiting for their friend and Buster's master, Fatty, to arrive.
"We haven't seen Fatty for ages,"
said Bets.
3 months at school and then he rushes off to Switzerland. "I bet I know what he'll say as soon as he sees us,"
said Pip, grinning.
"He'll say, 'Well, got any mystery on hand?'" "And we haven't,"
said Larry.
"Peterswood's been as good as gold. Mr. Goon can't have had anything to do at all."
Mr. Goon, the village policeman, had indeed had a peaceful fortnight. Nothing as exciting as even a small burglary had happened. A taxi drove up to the station. A man leaned out of the window and beckoned to the one and only porter.
"Hey, porter, come and take these cases. Look, Nippy, we've not got much time."
The porter ran up at once and took out 2 small cases. A man got out of the taxi and helped out a woman. Both were middle-aged, well-dressed and cheerful-looking. The woman carried a tiny white poodle.
"Oh, darling Poppet,"
she said.
"don't get a cold in this icy wind."
She tucked the little thing under her fur coat, and only its quaint little pointed nose looked out. The 4 children thought it was a little dear.
"Do buck up, Bill. You haven't much time to get the tickets,"
said the woman with the dog.
Plenty of time,"
said Bill, and strode into the station.
"Hello, is that the train in the distance? My word, we'll have to hurry."
The woman rushed onto the platform with the little dog.
"Oh, it isn't our train after all. It's going the other way. Oh, Poppet, what a shock I got."
The woman with the dog sat down on a seat and set the little poodle down on the platform. At once Buster began to sniff at its woolly fur, and the little poodle yelped in sudden fright. Buster ran round to the front of the seat, twisting his lead across the woman's legs. She screamed and snatched Poppet up at once, afraid that Buster was going to take a snap at the poodle. To make matters worse, a train thundered into the station at that moment, and Poppet nearly went mad with fright. She leapt out of her mistress's arms and tore off at top speed. Buster tried to race after her, forgetting about his lead, and nearly strangled himself. He got caught up in the woman's legs, and she fell over, squealing loudly.
"Oh! Oh! Catch Poppet, someone! Oh, what is this dog doing? Get away, you brute!"
There was a terrific commotion. All 4 children tried to catch Poppet, and then Pip went to rescue poor Buster, who was being well and truly kicked by the scared woman. She was very angry indeed.
"Oh, whose dog is this? What do you want to let him run under a seat for? Oh, where's a policeman? Oh, where's my dog?"
Nobody took any notice of the train that had just come in, not even the 4 children. They were so concerned about Buster and poor frightened Poppet. So they didn't notice Fatty stepping from the train with his father and mother, looking plump and the picture of health. He soon saw the others, and was rather astonished to find them so engrossed that they weren't even looking out for him.
"You get a taxi, Mother,"
said Fatty.
"I walk back with the others. I see they're here."
Fatty walked over to where Pip was trying to apologise to the angry woman and her husband. He now had his hand firmly on Buster's collar, and Buster was trying his hardest to squirm away. He began to bark loudly, and then suddenly wrenched himself from Pip's hand.
"Well,"
said a familiar voice.
"at least somebody recognises me. Hello, Buster."
All the 4 swung round at once. Bets ran at Fatty, almost knocking him over.
"Oh, Fatty! Oh, you're here?" "Looks like it,"
said Fatty. And then there was a general clapping of backs and friendly punches. Buster nearly barked the station down, he was so excited. He pawed so hard at Fatty's legs that Fatty had to lift him up and carry him.
"Whose dog is that?"
demanded the man called Bill.
"I never saw such a badly behaved one in my life. Knocked my wife over and made her coat all dusty. Ah, there's a policeman. Come over here, my man. I want to report this dog. It's been out of control, attacked my wife's poodle and caused my wife to fall down."
To the children's horror, there was Mr. Goon. He had come to buy a paper at the station and had heard the commotion and walked onto the platform to see what it was. He still had his bicycle clips on his legs, and his bulging eyes gleamed with pleasure.
"Sir, this dog made a savage attack, you say? Just let me take down a note. This dog's been a pest for a long time."
Mr. Goon took out his notebook and licked his pencil. What a bit of luck to have a real complaint about that horrible dog. The train pulled out of the station, but nobody noticed. Everyone was looking at the little group of children surrounded by grown-ups. Buster leapt out of Fatty's arms as soon as he saw Mr. Goon and danced joyfully round his ankles. Goon flapped at him with his notebook.
"Call this dog off! Here, you, call this dog off! I'll report him all right.
Suddenly, the woman gave a squeal of joy.
Oh, here's Poppet back again. Oh, with Larkin. Oh, I thought you weren't going to come in time to take Poppet back home with you, Larkin.
Larkin was a queer-looking fellow who stooped as he walked and dragged one leg behind him in a limp. He looked fat and shapeless in an old and voluminous overcoat, and had a scarf round the bottom part of his face and an old cap over his eyes. He carried Poppet in his arms.
"Who's this?"
demanded Goon, looking with surprise at the odd fellow who suddenly appeared with Poppet.
Oh, it's only Larkin, who lives in the cottage in the grounds of Tally-Ho, the house we rent,"
said the woman.
"He was told to come to the station in time to collect Poppet and take her back again with him. He's going to look after her. But I did want to have my darling Poppet till the very last minute, didn't I, Poppet?"
She took Poppet into her arms and fondled her. She spoke to Larkin again.
"Now, you will look after her well, won't you? You'll remember all I told you to do, and I'll soon be back to see her. Take her now before our train comes in and scares her."
Larkin shuffled off, limping as he went. He hadn't said a word. Poppet had been handed back to him as if she were a doll and was now snuggled into his coat again. Goon was growing impatient. He still had his notebook in his hand. The children were wondering whether they could make a dash and go, but Goon had his eyes on them.
"Now, madam," said Goon, "about this dog here, can I have your name and address, please? And—"
"Oh, here's our train!"
squealed the woman, and immediately they elbowed poor Goon aside. The man and the woman climbed into a carriage, and off went the train.
"Go,"
said Goon in disgust, and shut his notebook. He looked round for Buster and the others, but they were gone. The next morning, the 5 children met in the shed in Fatty's garden. The others told Fatty that it was a dull time in Peterswood without even a hint of a mystery.
"Let's go out for a walk,"
suggested Fatty.
"Come on,
Said Daisy.
let's go down to the river. There's some baby swans there, and the parents bring them to be fed. We'll take some bread."
They fed the swans and then wandered up the river path, enjoying the pale January sun. The swans swam with them for some way, the little cygnets following behind. They came to a small gate that gave onto the river path, and Bets looked over it idly. Then she pulled at Fatty's arm.
"Oh, look! Isn't that exactly like the dear little poodle we saw yesterday at the station? The one whose mistress made all the fuss about Buster?"
They all looked over the gate. Bets began to call loudly.
"Poppet! Poppet, are you Poppet? Here, Poppet!"
and the poodle straight away ran over to the gate, its stiff little tail wagging like a pendulum.
Oh, there you are,
said Betts triumphantly.
Oh, what did I... Oh, Poppet, oh, you are a darling. Oh, Fatty, isn't she sweet? She trots about as if she learns ballet dancing.
So she does,
said Fatty, seeing exactly what Betts meant.
At any moment now, Poppet will rise on her toes and pirouette. Oh, Poppet, why did you cause all that upset with Buster?
Poppet put her little pointed nose through the gate and sniffed at Buster, who sniffed back. He licked the tip of Poppet's nose, and Betts laughed.
Oh, he likes her. I wonder if she's lonely without her mistress. I didn't much like the look of that man who took her back home. Did you?
Well, I didn't like what I could see of him, which wasn't much,
said Fatty.
I wonder where they live. In that cottage there, I suppose.
A small, not very well-kept cottage stood at the side of the garden. Much further away rose a big house, probably the one that Poppet's master and mistress had left the day before. No smoke rose from its chimney, so presumably it was now empty. But smoke rose from the chimneys of the little cottage, steadily and thickly, and the 5 children immediately pictured the muffled-up man sitting hunched over a roaring fire. Poppet wanted Buster to play with her. She pranced away from the gate, came back and pranced away again, looking over her shoulder as if to say, "Do come on, I'd like a game with you." Buster scraped at the gate and whined.
No, Buster,
said Fatty.
You're already in enough trouble with Mr. Goon without getting into any more. Come on, we'd better go.
They were just turning away when a voice came from the cottage.
Poppet! Here, Poppet! Where are you? You come along in!
Poppet immediately disappeared into a bush to hide, and there she lay quietly. The children watched in amusement.
Where's that dog gone?
said the voice, and footsteps came down the path, limping, shuffling steps, and into view came the same man they had seen the day before, dressed in much the same way, except that now he had no scarf round his neck. The children saw that he had a dirty-looking, unkempt beard and moustache, shaggy eyebrows, and bits of grey-black hair sticking out from under his cap. He wore glasses with thick lenses, and seemed to be short-sighted as he peered here and there for the hidden dog.
Poppet, where is that wretched dog?
said the man in an exasperated voice.
Wait till I get you. I'll show you I mean what I says. Slipping out like that. I won't half thrash you.
Betts and Daisy looked horrified. What? Thrash a little thing like Poppet? Surely the man couldn't mean it. Another voice came on the clear, wintry air.
Bob Larkin! Didn't I tell you to come and help me with them potatoes? You come in and do them.
The man scowled.
I'm just coming, he said. I'm after that dratted dog. It's got out.
Oh, my word, I hope as though that gate's shut,
cried the second voice.
We'll get into trouble, all right, if anything happens to that precious dog.
A woman now came into sight, very thin, wearing a bedraggled skirt and a dull red shawl wrapped tightly round her. Her hair was so extraordinary that the children gaped to see it. It was obviously a wig, mouse colour, and much too curly, and much too crooked.
That's a wig,
muttered Daisy to Betts.
Poor thing. I expect she's bald.
The woman was not a very attractive sight, for besides the wig, she wore dark glasses. She coughed now and again, and pulled a thick green scarf round her throat and chin. Then she sniffed loudly.
Bob Larkin, you come on in. I'm not going to make my cold worse coming out here and yelling for you. Come on in.
The man suddenly saw the little dog hiding in the bushes. He pounced on her and gripped her. She whined in sudden fear. The man shook her angrily.
I'll teach you to slip out like that. I'll give you a real good lambing.
Here, hold on,
said Fatty at once.
She's only a little thing.
The man swung round and peered short-sightedly at the watching children. He hadn't noticed them before. Buster gave a sudden growl. The man looked hard at the little Scotty, then at the children again.
Why, you're the kids whose dog caused all that rumpus yesterday, he said. Mr. Goon's been round to see me about that. That dog of yours is going to get into trouble, you see. Now you get off that gate and go away, and don't you start telling me what I'm to do. I'm in charge here, and I'll complain to that Bobby if you make any trouble.
Betts felt frightened and took hold of Buster's collar. Buster's nose was still sticking through the bars of the gate, and he growled when Bob Larkin took hold of Poppet's collar very roughly and dragged her up the garden.
You'd like to go to Poppet's help as much as we would, Buster, old fellow, wouldn't you?
Said Fatty, frowning after the man.
But you've got into enough trouble for the time being. Oh, what an unpleasant pair,
said Fatty, as they walked on. They suddenly heard dismal howls coming from the cottage, and looked miserably at one another. Poppet must be getting her lambing. Horrid old man. Buster growled and ran back to the gate, pawing at it.
Good old Buster,
said Pip.
Sorry we can't let you do a bit of rescue work.
They went back, feeling rather upset over a dear little dog like Poppet being hit. Things didn't look too exciting for the holidays. The chief topic of conversation the next day was a headline story in the morning newspaper. Larry, Pip, Daisy and Betts could hardly wait till they got to Fatty's shed to decide what to do.
Priceless old picture stolen from famous gallery. Last seen in Peterswood. Thieves just escaped the net of the police, leaving their dog behind. Police looking everywhere for the Lorenzos,
read Larry.
Well, there's our mystery. Those people at the station. What are we going to do?
Fatty had more details to add. He had asked his mother about the Lorenzos, and she had told him that they were actors, and how badly they behaved, and what wild parties they gave, and upset their neighbours, the Daniels, very much. She said that all Peterswood disliked them.
It is a mystery then, after all,
said Pip.
Right under our noses. Now, when are we going to get on to it? I'm going to ring Superintendent Jenks,
said Fatty,
and ask him if we can help.
Peterswood was in the news, and he and the rest of the find-outers would soon be right in the middle of something. Fatty thought for a while. What should he tell the superintendent? That he had seen the two Lorenzos on the station yesterday, but then many people had. Should he ask if he could go and see the Larkins? He might be able to get something out of them that Goon couldn't. Anyway, he was certain that he could do something. He went to the telephone and asked for the superintendent.
It's Frederick Trotwell here,
said Fatty.
He knows me.
His name was passed through to the chief's office, and Fatty heard the superintendent's voice, sharp and impatient.
Yes, Frederick, what is it?
Sir, it's about the Lorenzos,
said Fatty.
As it's right where I live, sir, can I do anything?
I fear not, said the chief. The Lorenzos are not there, and I doubt if the missing picture is either. If they could be found, they would be found together.
Oh,
said Fatty, in disappointment.
Then, isn't there anything we can do, sir?
Nothing except keep your eyes and ears open as usual, said the chief. I'm sending a man down to go over the house with a fine-tooth comb, just in case the picture's there, but I've no real hope of it.
Will Mr. Goon be working on the case, sir?
Asked Fatty, rather forlornly.
Yes, but there isn't much case at Peterswood to work on, said the superintendent. I wish Goon had kept his eye on the Lorenzos more. They have a shocking reputation, as everyone knows.
I suppose I couldn't go and talk to the Larkins, sir, could I?
Asked Fatty, feeling that this mystery was slipping out of his hands altogether.
No, certainly not, said the chief at once. My man is doing that with Goon. No sense in your butting in there. You'll do more harm than good. I don't mean that you mustn't pass the time of day with them if you meet them, but you must remember that this case has really left Peterswood now, and gone goodness knows where. I don't for one moment think that Larkins can possibly know anything that will be of the slightest help to us.
Oh, I expect you're right, sir,
said Fatty,
feeling very down in the dumps indeed.
Well, I won't keep you, sir. Good luck.
He put down the receiver and looked gloomily at Buster, who was sitting nearby with cocked ears.
No go, Buster.
He said dolefully.
It's all come to nothing. The mystery has fled from Peterswood and disappeared.
The other four were most disappointed,
Oh, Fatty,
said Daisy.
there must be something we can do. There really must.
They all met at Larry's at 11:30 and sat down to a mid-morning snack of hot buns from the oven and cups of cocoa. They felt more cheerful after a couple of buns each,
The chief really did seem to think we can't do a thing this time.
said Fatty.
Apparently, the two main things are, one, to find the Lorenzos, who are probably out of the country by now, and two, to find the picture. And the chief thinks that where one is, the other will be there also.
Well, we can't possibly go gallivanting all over the country looking for them ourselves.
Said Daisy.
So we must just be content to do nothing.
I think we might keep a watch on the house, perhaps,
Said Larry.
just in case the Lorenzos come back to it. They won't.
Said Fatty.
But what about their little dog?
Said Bets.
Mrs. Lorenzo really did seem attached to it. I mean, she might send for it, mightn't she? If it suddenly disappears, we'd know that the Lorenzos had sent a messenger of some sort for it.
Well, that certainly is a point.
Said Fatty.
Yes, well, perhaps on the whole we won't give this up straight away. But the thing is, how on earth are we going to keep a watch on the Larkins to see if any messenger is ever sent? I mean, the house is some way from where we live, and we can't spend all our days or nights there. Oh, it's hopeless,
Said Pip, who didn't particularly want to spend any part of a cold day or night watching people like the Larkins.
We can't do it. If we knew somebody who lived next door, it'd be easy. But we don't.
Hello, said a voice, suddenly interrupting, and a tousled head peeped round the door. I've been to your house, Fatty, and your mother sent me here. Ern, cried everyone. And sure enough, it was Ern, Mr. Goon's young nephew, whom the children had made a friend of during their last mystery. Although he was Mr. Goon's nephew, he wasn't like his uncle one bit, and the children liked him a lot. Nice to see you all again, he announced, settling down. Anything on? Any mysteries going? I've heard about them people called the Lorenzos. Proper set-up, that was. I bet my uncle's excited.
Have you seen him yet?
Asked Daisy. Oh, no, said Ern in horror. I'd run a mile if I saw him. I'm scared stiff of him. He'd box my ears as soon as look at me. They discussed the Lorenzo case, and how maddening it was that the most important things concerned, the Lorenzos themselves and the picture, had gone,
So you see, there's nothing much we can do, Ern.
said Fatty.
I can't see anything we can get hold of. No clues or suspects like we usually do.
Yes, it's bad luck, said Ern sympathetically. I was hoping I might be able to help a bit, if you really wanted me. I'm coming to stay in Peterswood. My mum's got to go to hospital for a bit. She's got a bad leg, poor mum. I'm going to relations for a week.
Oh, gracious! You're not staying with Mr. Goon again, are you?
Said Bets. Ah, you bet I'm not, said Ern. It's my father's cousin, a Mrs. Whoosh,
Oh, what a wonderful name.
said Daisy.
Sounds as if her husband ought to make rockets.
Said Larry, and everyone laughed.
Oh, where does your Auntie Whoosh live?
Asked Bets. Well, she's in the cottage belonging to a Mrs. Daniels, who lives at High Chimneys, said Ern. Her husband is the gardener, and she helps in the house. She's got twin girls. Ern stopped when he saw the sudden, intense interest on Fatty's face at the mention of the Daniels. He looked at Fatty in surprise. What's up? He said. You look all sort of worked up, Fatty,
Nothing.
said Fatty.
It's perfect. It's too good to be true. Don't you know that the Daniels live next door to the house that the Lorenzos rented, Ern? And we wanted to keep a watch on it, but it's a good way from our own homes, and...
Caw, said Ern, light dawning on him suddenly. You mean... I say, do you mean I can come into this because I'll be able to pop my head over the hedge and watch any goings-on at the house next door,"
You've got it, Ern.
said Fatty, and clapped him on the back.
We were almost on the point of giving up the mystery when you came in, and now we'll be on it full speed. Oh, what a bit of luck you were staying with the Wooshes.
Thereupon, a most animated conversation began. The newspapers were fetched, and everyone pored over the reports of the Lorenzo case. The 5 find-outers meant to get every single bit of information they could.
It even says here that they left Poppet the poodle behind.
Said Bets.
And here's a picture of her in Mrs. Lorenzo's arms. Oh, and listen, it says, Gloria Lorenzo is passionately attached to her little poodle, who she has had for 7 years. It is the first time she has ever left the little dog behind, and therefore it seems that the Lorenzos meant to flee the country.
Ern could keep an eye on those awful Larkins too,
said Daisy.
and see that they don't ill-treat dear little Poppet.
Oh, I'll keep an eye on them, promised Ern. You just give me my orders,
He could keep an eye on Tally-Ho the house as well,
said Larry.
just in case the picture's been left behind, hidden there somewhere after all. I mean, if he sees any suspicious strangers about, he'd have to report it to us at once.
Yes, I will, said the excited Ern. I'll have my bike, you see, and I'll keep it all pumped up and ready to fly off to Fatty's if I have anything to report. They talked and talked. It was all most exciting. In Ern's Uncle Woosh's garden, there was some kind of evergreen fir, very tall and broad. Its branches were admirable for climbing. Ern went over to it, climbed up it, and began to make a peephole through the thick branches so that he might look down on the Larkins' cottage over the hedge.
What are you doing?
Asked the twin girls.
You're going to make house up there? Can we live in it? We'll have a chimney?
Ern found that he could see right down into the Larkins' garden. In fact, the cottage was so near that he could smell the smoke from the chimney. The twins watched with interest.
Here, what are you doing? Is that a spy hole? Oh, can we spy the Larkins? We don't like them. Here, let's throw a stone down their chimney.
The last idea appealed to Ern very much. He had never tried throwing stones down a chimney, but it certainly looked quite easy from where he sat. Then he reluctantly dismissed the idea from his mind. Now, you listen to me, said Ern, taking command firmly. We'll play that the Larkins are our enemies, see? And we'll play that we've got to keep a watch on them and all they do. So, we'll build a little house up here, and I'll keep watch.
Oh, us too,
said the twins both together. Ern nodded. All of us. When I'm not up here, you two can take a turn. And you'll have to report to me, you see, because I'm your chief. This is our hidey hole. The twins were thrilled. They gazed at Ern in admiration. He was clearly much, much cleverer than he looked. I'll go and see if there's any bits of wood and stuff to bring up here, said Ern, and disappeared rapidly. He met his uncle as he walked back to the cottage. Uncle Woosh was a tall, silent man who only came into the house for meals and for very little else. Ern was rather afraid of him, but decided that his uncle was the man to ask about planks and nails.
Yes, get what you want out of my shed, said his uncle. Plenty there.
He took himself off, and Ern ran to the shed, pleased. Now, to build a little place in that tree. What a fine spy hole. What would Fatty say to that? 2 days went by. Fatty and the others pored over the reports each day, but there was no more news of the Lorenzos, except that the police seemed more or less certain that they were hiding somewhere in the country, waiting to fly out as soon as things had quietened down a little.
I should have thought that it would be very difficult to hide anywhere, with everyone on the lookout for you,
said Daisy.
I mean, the Lorenzos would be very easy to recognize.
Their photographs been in every single paper.
Well, you forget that they've been actors.
said Fatty.
It'd be easy for them to disguise themselves so nobody would know them.
The children all sighed.
Bother.
Said Fatty dismally.
It's too maddening to have something like this under your noses, so to speak, and not be able to even get a bite at it.
For 2 days the five led perfectly normal lives, with Ern and Buster following them around. The Lorenzo mystery wasn't even mentioned until the late edition of the evening paper arrived, just as they were all saying goodbye to each other in Fatty's hall. It was pushed through the letterbox and fell onto the mat. It lay there, folded in half, with the top half showing clearly. Fatty gave an exclamation as he picked it up.
Hey! Look here, see what it says? The Lorenzos reported in Maidenhead. Maidenhead? Well, that's quite near here.
He read the paragraph quickly.
Oh, well, apparently it's only just a guess by someone. Oh, anyway, surely the Lorenzos wouldn't be foolish enough to travel about undisguised. I expect we'll keep on getting those reports from all over the country just to keep interest alive.
Caw, said Ern. Maidenhead. If it was them, they might visit Tally-Ho House or the Larkins Cottage to get Poppet.
Will Goon be watching the place tonight, do you think?
Asked Larry.
I don't know. Possibly, if there's anything in the report,
Said Fatty.
Ern, now, keep your eyes skinned tonight, will you?
Oh, I will, promised Ern, thrilled. I wouldn't mind scouting round a bit myself, but Uncle might be about and I wouldn't dare. I'd be sure to bump into him,
I'll be along before midnight,
said Fatty, making up his mind.
just in case.
Right, said Ern, more and more thrilled. I'll be up in the treehouse watching Fatty. I'll hoot like an owl to let you know I'm there. He put his shut hands to his mouth, with the thumbs on his lips, and blew softly. Immediately the hall was filled with the sound of quivering owl hoots.
Hey, jolly good.
Said Larry admiringly.
Right,
Said Fatty.
you be up in the treehouse, and I'll be scouting round till midnight. Now, I don't really expect anything to happen, but I won't leave anything to chance. I look out for Mr. Goon, of course. Goodbye.
Said Larry, hearing 7 o'clock strike.
Thanks for a lovely time. Oh, buck up, Daisy.
They all went off. Ern left the others at the corner and rode back to his aunt's, full of excitement over his night's plan. So that night, when his aunt and uncle and the twins were sound asleep, Ern crept out of bed and down the little stairway carrying a blanket and a rug. He was soon in the little treehouse, peering through the peephole in the branches. The moon was coming up and the night was quite light. Ern popped a bullseye in his mouth and prepared to watch. He had never in his life felt so happy. Fatty did not arrive at Tally-Ho grounds till much later. The night was light and dark alternately. When the moon sailed out from behind a big cloud, the road was as bright as day. When it sailed behind a big cloud, it was difficult to see without a torch. Fatty kept in the shadow of the trees and walked softly, listening for any footsteps. He met no one at all. Peterswood had certainly gone to bed early that night. He went down to the river and walked along the river path to the wicket gate leading into Tally-Ho grounds. He felt that to go in at the front gate would certainly attract attention, and indeed it was possible that Mr. Goon might be there, keeping watch also. The Larkins cottage was in darkness, and there was not a sound. Fatty remembered that Ern would be watching from the treehouse, and he stopped under a bush to send out a hoot. "Ooh," called Fatty, on exactly the right note. "Ooh." And back came the answer from Ern in the tree. "Ooh, ooh." It was so exactly like an owl that Fatty nodded his head approvingly. Ern was good. He began to make his way to the big house. It was in utter darkness. Fatty wished he could suddenly see a flicker or a flash out there to tell him that somebody was about. That would be exciting. But everything was silence and darkness in the deserted house. Ern hooted again. Then, before Fatty could answer, there came another hoot, and then another. Whatever was Ern doing? Then Fatty laughed. Of course. It was real owls this time. They liked hunting on a moonlit night like this. He thought he would send back a hoot, however, in case it was Ern. So he put his thumbs to his mouth and sent out a long, quivering hoot. Immediately, an answering hoot came, one that sounded quite urgent. Was it Ern? It was impossible to sense the right direction of the hoot. Could Ern be trying to give him a message? Was he warning him? Fatty decided to stand under a thick, dark bush for a while and wait quietly. The night was so silent, and he might be able to pick up any noise if someone was about. Then he was sure he heard a soft crunch, as if someone was walking carefully on frosty grass. Oh, very carefully. Fatty held his breath. Could it be one of the Lorenzos? Had he, or she, come back to get something from the house? They would be sure to have keys. He stood still again. The moon swung out from behind a cloud, and everything was suddenly bright. Fatty crouched back into the bush, looking around to see if he could spy anyone. The sound came again, a little crunch of frosted grass. Fatty stiffened. Yes, it came from round the corner of the house, he was sure of it. Someone was there, standing there, or moving very cautiously, bit by bit.
I really must see,
thought Fatty.
If it's Lorenzo, I'd better scoot off and telephone Superintendent Jenks. It can't be Mr. Goon. I should hear his heavy breathing. Well, this fellow doesn't make any sound at all except the tiny crunching noise.
Fatty made his way very, very carefully from the bush, glad that the grass was not so frosty on his side of the house. He slid his head carefully round the corner, and very dimly he saw a figure standing by the windows of Tally-Ho House. The figure was absolutely still. Fatty could not see any details at all, except that it seemed to be a fairly tall man. He was certainly not the short, burly Mr. Goon. Fatty's heart began to beat fast. Who was this? He fumbled for his torch, meaning to flash it suddenly on the man's face and then run off at top speed to telephone a warning. He forgot about the moon. Just as he was about to switch on his torch, the moon shot out from behind the cloud, and immediately the place was flooded with light. Fatty found himself gazing at a tall policeman in a helmet, and the policeman was also gazing at Fatty, looking most astonished. He put a whistle to his mouth and whistled shrilly, taking a step towards Fatty at the same time.
It's all right,
began Fatty. And then up galloped Mr. Goon from his hiding place behind the nearby summer house. His mouth fell open when he saw Fatty. Then he advanced on him in rage. You again? Now, don't I ever get rid of you, toad of a boy? You were all the owls, I suppose, hooting like mad. What you doing here? I'll tell the chief of this. Obstructing the course of duty, interfering with the law, messing up things when we are on watch.
I didn't know you were watching, Mr. Goon,
said Fatty.
I'm sorry to have disturbed you. This is honestly a mistake.
The other policeman stood gaping in surprise. Who was this boy? What's your name? He said, taking out a notebook. I know his name, said Mr. Goon angrily. I've heard it too often, I can tell you that. This is Frederick Tropville, and this time he is going to get into trouble. Arrest him as an intruder on private property, constable. Wait a minute. Is this really Frederick Tropville? Said the other policeman. He's a friend of the chief's, isn't he? I'm not arresting him, Mr. Goon. You can do that if you want to. You do as I tell you, said Goon, losing his temper. Who do you think you are giving me my orders? You are under my orders tonight, P.C. Johns, as well you know. The moon went most conveniently behind a thick cloud at this point, and Fatty thought it would be just as well if he slipped away. He really didn't want to be arrested, and he was sorry that he had barged into Goon's little spot of night duty. No wonder Ern had done such a lot of urgent hooting. He must have seen Goon and the other policeman wandering about in the bright moonlight. Fatty slipped out of the wicket gate and trotted swiftly home, pondering over what was the best thing to do. Perhaps on the whole, it would be best to leave it till the morning and then telephone. Mr. Goon would have simmered down by then. Ern saw the encounter between Fatty and Mr. Goon and the other policeman, though he could hear nothing except a murmur of voices. His eyes nearly fell out of his head with trying to see what was happening. "Oh, Fatty, Fatty, make a run for it." Ern found himself saying these words over and over again. Then the moon went behind a cloud, and when it came out again, oh, joy! Ern saw a running figure on the river path, and the two policemen hunting here and there for the vanished Fatty. Ern heaved an enormous sigh of relief. He slumped back into the treehouse, feeling quite tired after all the suspense. It really seemed very cosy and comfortable in the treehouse. He yawned a huge yawn. At the same moment, an owl passed by the tree and hooted. "Ooh!" Ern was up like a shot. Was that old Fatty back again? He peered out of the tree, but could see nothing, not even a sign of Goon and his companion. The gardens lay bathed in the brilliant moonlight, undisturbed and peaceful. The owl flew by again, and this time Ern saw it. "Ah, don't you come hooting round me again," said Ern. "I've had enough of you tonight." And once more, Ern cuddled down in his blankets and shut his eyes. This time he fell fast asleep, and slept for about 2 hours. Then a noise awakened him. It was a quiet, humming kind of noise, some way away. Was it an aeroplane? Perhaps. Was it a car far away on a road? Ern lay down again. He shut his eyes. Then he heard another noise, and sat up. Splash, splash, splash. Ern looked out of the treehouse again. Was somebody swimming in the river at this time of night? No, not on a frosty night in January. Ern lay down again, determined that he wouldn't be disturbed any more. He was soon asleep. Small noises came to him on the night wind, and once he thought he heard voices, but he was sure he was dreaming. He imagined he heard a dog barking, and half opened his eyes. Yes, it was. Probably Poppet. It sounded exactly like her high little bark. She'd get slapped for waking the couple up in the middle of the night. Ern slept on. Dawn came slowly, and the sun sent golden fingers into the sky. Soon it would be light. Ern awoke. He sat up, bewildered, but then remembered everything. He'd better get up and climb down the tree. His aunt would wonder where he was. She must be up and about. Ern was just about to climb down the tree when he heard shouting, loud, angry shouts, and then he heard bangs, bang, 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 bang. Goodness, what was all that? Ern slithered down the tree and went to the hedge and listened. The noise came from somewhere in the grounds of Tally-Ho House. Ern wondered what it was. It couldn't be Fatty back again and in trouble, surely. He slipped through the hedge and went by the Larkins' cottage. The door opened, and the old man came out, plump in his overcoat, his scarf and cap on as usual. He limped over to Ern. "What's that noise?" he said in his hoarse voice. "You go and see. My wife's ill today, and I don't want to leave her." Ern nodded at the scruffy old man and went cautiously in the direction of the noise. It grew louder. Bang, bang! "Help! Let us out! Bang, bang!" Ern was mystified. Who was locked in, and where, and why? It wasn't Fatty's voice, thank goodness. Ern went in the direction of the noise. It sounded round the further corner of the house, where the boiler house was. Ern turned the corner and saw the small boiler house not far off. Yes, the noise was coming from there. Ern looked at the little place fearfully. He wasn't letting anyone out till he knew who they were. He went cautiously up to the boiler house and stood on a box outside to look in at the small window. He was so astounded at what he saw that he fell off the box. Inside the boiler house, furiously angry, were Mr. Goon and the other policeman. Their helmets were hanging on a nail. Ern saw two hot, furious faces upturned to him as he appeared at the window, and heard more loud shouts.
Open the door, Ern! What are you doing here? Open the door and let us out!
Goon had been most astonished to see Ern's scared face at the tiny little window, but very thankful. Now perhaps they could get out of this stifling hot boiler house and get something to eat and drink.
Why did we ever come in here? Groaned Goon, as he heard Ern struggling with the large stiff key in the other side of the door. It was so cold, and it seemed such a good idea to light up the boiler and shut the door and have a little warm. Must have been the fumes that sent us off to sleep so sudden-like, said his companion dolefully. I feel as if my head's bursting. Oh, drat that boy! Why can't he unlock the door? Oh, buck up, Ern, you dolt! roared Mr. Goon. We're cooking hot in here!
Who locked us in? Said the other man. That's what I want to know. It wouldn't be the Lorenzos, would it now? They couldn't have come after all, could they?
No, I've told you it was that boy Frederick Trotville, the one we found here last night, said Goon crossly. One of his funny tricks. Oh, he'll laugh on the other side of his face this time. I'll go straight to the chief about this, dead straight. Locking us into a boiler house. Why, we might have been dead with the fumes this morning. Ern, what are you doing out there? You've only got to turn the key. Are you asleep, boy?
No, Uncle, and don't you talk to me like that when I'm doing my best to help you, panted Ern. It's a whopping big key and very rusty. I've a good mind to leave you here if you don't talk properly to me when I'm trying hard. Mr. Goon was amazed to hear this cheek from Ern. But he had to swallow his wrath and speak in honey-like tones, afraid that Ern really would go off and leave them.
No, Ern, it's only because we're almost cooked, he said. I know you're doing your best. There's a good lad. Yes, that's it. The key's turned.
Ern fled as his uncle and the second policeman fell out of the boiler house. One look at their beetroot-like faces and protruding eyes was enough for him. Goon and his companion walked with as much dignity as they could muster past the Larkins' cottage on their way to the river. The old fellow came out of his door, shuffling as usual.
Oh, what's the matter? He said in his hoarse voice. I'll tell you later, said Goon, who was not particularly anxious that the tale of the boiler house should go all round Peterswood. No, nothing much. We just kept watch last night, that's all. You didn't hear anything, did you? We never heard a sound, so we're going off duty now.
Mr. Goon went back to his house and took up the telephone, a grim look on his face. He made a brief report, which caused quite a stir at the other end. It even made the chief himself come to the telephone.
Goon, what's the story about Frederick Trotville? I don't believe it. Sir, I wouldn't tell you such a story if it wasn't true, said Goon earnestly. And P.C. Johns, who was with me, will tell you that this boy was in the grounds last night, snooping round after us. One of his little jokes, sir, this was. He thought it would be funny to lock us in. But what were you doing in the boiler house, Goon, when you should have been outside on duty? Said the chief's sharp voice. Oh, just looking round, sir, said Goon, and then let his imagination get the better of him. We heard footsteps outside, sir. Then the door banged, and the key turned the lock, and we heard Master Frederick's laugh, sir. A most horrible laugh, sir. And that's enough, Goon, said the chief's voice. All right, I'll see to this. Did you hear or see anything at all last night? Nothing at all, sir, said Goon.
And then the telephone was clicked off at the chief's end. Goon stood quite still, his face red with delight.
Oh, you toad of a boy, he said. Now you've gone too far at last. You're finished.
Fatty was just going down to breakfast when a big black police car swept up the drive to the front door, and out got Superintendent Jenks, looking rather grim. Fatty was thrilled.
Gosh, he's got some news, and he wants me to help in some way,
thought Fatty joyfully. He went to open the door himself.
I want a word with you, Frederick,
said the chief, and Fatty led him into the study, surprised by the superintendent's sharp voice. Once the door was shut, the chief looked straight at Fatty.
What possessed you to lock Goon and the other fellow up last night? He demanded grimly.
Fatty stared in surprise.
What? Oh, sir, I don't know what you mean, sir,
he said at last.
I really don't. Where am I supposed to have locked them up? In the cells?
Don't play the fool,
said the chief, his eyes like gimlets boring into poor Fatty. Don't you realise that you can go a bit too far with your jokes on Goon?
Sir,
said Fatty earnestly.
Do believe me when I say I haven't the remotest idea what you're talking about. I saw Mr. Goon last night in the grounds of Tally-Ho House, where I was keeping watch in case the Lorenzos turned up. I'd seen a report that they'd been spotted at Maidenhead. Now, Mr. Goon had another policeman with him, sir. I left the grounds a few minutes after I'd seen them and said a few words to them and went straight home to bed. They weren't locked up when I left them, sir. I must ask you to believe me, sir. I never tell lies.
The chief relaxed and sat down.
Right. I believe you, of course, Frederick, he said. But I must say it's very odd how you always turn up in the middle of things. Goon and Johns were locked up all night in the boiler house at Tally-Ho, and Ern let them out this morning.
What, Ern?
Said Fatty, startled.
Yes, he seemed to be about 2, said the chief. Goon and Johns were apparently half-cooked. The boiler house was so hot.
But, sir, the boiler wasn't going when I left them,
said Fatty.
I'd have noticed if it was. I'd have seen the glow when I went near it.
Oh? Then who lit it? Said the chief.
Mr. Goon and Johns, I suppose,
said Fatty.
It was a cold night, and they might have thought it was a good idea to light up the boiler and have a warm, sir. And possibly they possibly fell asleep, sir.
Yes, that thought also occurred to me, said the chief.
It might have been the fumes that sent them off, of course,
said Fatty generously.
They might not have meant to sleep there, only get warm.
Yes, quite so, said the superintendent. Still, the fact remains that somebody locked them in.
Yes. Who?
Said Fatty.
Do you think the Lorenzos could have slipped back, sir, for some reason or other? Perhaps to fetch the little poodle Mrs. Lorenzo is so fond of, or, well, even to get something from the house.
It's possible, said the chief. Yes, quite possible. They've a reputation for being daredevils. We'll find out if the dog is gone or if the house has been entered and anything personal taken. Something that they had left behind and wanted. What a fathead that fellow Goon is, isn't he? Still, I'm glad I came over here. I'd like you to take a hand now in this mystery, Frederick.
Oh, thank you very much, sir,
said Fatty, thrilled.
I'm not telling Goon this because he's such a blunderer, said the chief. But I have a distinct feeling that the Lorenzos are back in Peterswood for some reason or other. Perhaps, as you say, to get back the dog. Mrs. Lorenzo is quite mad about it, idolizes it, and I think it possible that they will try to get it. Or again, it's just possible that they didn't take the picture with them, but have left it behind in case they were caught for some accomplice to fetch.
But what about the crate they were said to have been seen with up north?
Asked Fatty. Well, that might have been a blind to put us off, said the chief. They're clever, those Lorenzos. You wouldn't believe the things they've done and got away with, too. They're about the cleverest tricksters I've had to deal with.
Well, I'll be proud to help,
said Fatty, as the chief got up to go.
Is there any particular thing you'd like me to do?
No, just go your own way, do what you like, said the chief. "Short of locking Goon up in the boiler house, of course. Though I feel very like doing that myself this morning." Fatty saw him off and went into the breakfast room feeling most elated. So Mr. Goon had told the chief a thumping big lie about him, had he? Well, it hadn't done him any good. He, Fatty, was now more or less in charge of something that was turning out to be jolly interesting. In fact, a very promising mystery. Ern came to see Fatty immediately after his breakfast. He'd had a lot to do explaining to his aunt about his night in the treehouse, but it was over at last. Now all he wanted to do was to tell Fatty about Goon and his companion in the boiler house, and how they had said that it was Fatty who locked them in. "Did you, Fatty?" said Ern, looking at him in awe. He was half disappointed when Fatty shook his head.
No, Ern. Much as I wish I could have done it, I didn't. Ern, you were up in that tree all night, you say. Now, did you hear or see anything at all?
"Well, owls, of course," said Ern. "What with you and me and the owls all hooting."
No, I don't mean owls,
said Fatty.
Now think hard, Ern. Did you hear any out-of-the-way sounds at all?
Ern thought back to his night in the tree. "Well, I heard a kind of engine noise," he said. "I thought at first it was an aeroplane, but it might have been a car."
Yes?
said Fatty.
Go on. Anything else?
I heard splashing on the river," said Ern, "and I thought I heard voices once, and a dog barking." Fatty was alert at once.
Voices? A dog barking? Hey, would that be Poppet?
"Yes, I think it was," said Ern. "Her bark is sort of high, isn't it? More like a yelp,"
Now you're sure about the voices?
said Fatty.
And the barking? You see, somebody besides me and Mr. Goon and Johns must have been there last night and locked them up.
"Caw, yes," said Ern. "Lot of people about last night, it seems. Well, those voices and barking was some time after you left. I tell you, I was half asleep by then."
Did Poppet's bark sound pleased or frightened?
asked Fatty. "Pleased," said Ern at once.
Hey, that's interesting.
Said Fatty.
Very interesting. Ern, I think the Lorenzos came by motorboat to get their dog from the Larkins last night, and perhaps to get a few things from the big house as well. Now, they saw Mr. Goon and Johns asleep as they passed the boiler house, and they neatly locked them in.
"You're right, Fatty," said Ern in great admiration. "It's wonderful to see how you work these things out. Well, if the dog's gone, we'll know it was the Lorenzos who were there last night,"
Now you go and tell the others to meet me down in my shed at 9:30.
said Fatty.
We'll all have a talk together.
So, at 9:30, the whole company was gathered together in the little shed and heard the grand tale of the night in the grounds of Tally-Ho and all that had happened there. Pip was so tickled to hear about Mr. Goon and Johns being locked in the boiler house that he laughed till he ached.
Now the first thing we must do is go up to the Larkins and find out about Poppet,
said Fatty.
If she's gone, it proves that the Lorenzos were there last night. We'll then put the Larkins through a lot of questions and try to get out of them what really did happen last night. Right,
said Larry.
Let's go now.
We shan't be able to see Mrs. Larkin, said Ern. She's ill. I saw old Bob Larkin this morning when I went to send Uncle Goon free. He heard the shouting and banging too.
Well, we can perhaps get something out of Larkin,
said Fatty.
Everyone got their bikes?
Everyone had. Buster was put into Fatty's basket and off they all went. They chose the river path again because the Larkins' cottage was so near it. They leaned their bike against the railings and marched up the path to the cottage. Fatty knocked on the door. It opened, and out came Mr. Larkin, still with his cap and scarf on, though he had discarded his overcoat and now wore a shapeless, baggy old tweed jacket. "Oh, what do you want?" he said in his hoarse voice, peering through the thick lenses of his glasses at the 6 silent children. When he saw Buster, he shut the door behind him and stood just outside it.
Mr. Larkin, could we have a word with you?
asked Fatty. "I don't charge nothing for that," said the man. "What's up?"
Could we come inside, please? It's a bit cold out here,
said Fatty,
feeling certain that Mr. Larkin had carefully shut the door behind him so that they couldn't see that the little dog was no longer running about inside.
You can come in if you leave your dog outside, said the man. I don't want that little poodle upset. She's overexcited today.
Fatty stared. It sounded as if the poodle was still there.
She's in her basket beside my wife,
said Larkin hoarsely. He coughed.
Oh,
thought Fatty.
so that's going to be the tale. His wife's not well, keeps to her bed, and the poodle keeps her company, though really it's been taken away in the night. Very clever. The Lorenzos must have thought that out.
I'd love to see the poodle,
said Bet suddenly, seeing that Fatty was now in difficulty.
Can I go into your wife's room and see her?
No, said the man. The children looked at one another, very, very suspicious. And then something surprising happened. A loud, excited barking came from the little cottage. Then a patter of feet could be heard, and then the little white poodle appeared at the kitchen window, her nose pressed against the pane as if she was looking for Buster. How all the children stared. All the 6 stared at Poppet as if they couldn't believe their eyes. As for Buster, he nearly went mad with excitement to see the dear little poodle with her nose at the window, looking down at him. Poppet wagged her tail hard and barked loudly. She seemed full of life and happiness, quite different from when they had seen her before.
I suppose she's so pleased because she saw her beloved mistress last night. But did she after all?
Said Fatty to the others.
We just thought it must be the Lorenzos who'd come and gone and fetched Poppet, but it might have been anyone now, because Poppet's still here. Oh, gosh. Oh, I've got to work things out all over again,
said Fatty. The children walked back to their bikes, sorry that they were no nearer solving the mystery than ever. Buster was the only member of the team who was happy. He still had his friend Poppet to play with. So Buster left them and went off by himself, having suddenly had a very good idea. He'd go back and play with that nice little poodle. He trotted off to the cottage and barked a small polite bark. Poppet at once leapt up to the window ledge again and looked out. Bets heard Buster barking and ran to get him. She saw the little poodle who was now outside and barking happily around Buster.
Oh, here's Poppet. She must have escaped out of the house to play with Buster,
said Bets.
Oh, listen, Mrs. Larkin's calling her.
Take her back, Bets,
said Fatty.
See if you can have a chat with Mrs. Larkin. Go on, you might be able to get something out of her.
Oh, all right,
said Bets, half scared, and took little Poppet into her arms. She went up the river path to the wicket gate, Buster at her heels, trying his hardest to jump up and lick the little poodle's nose. Bets went right up to the cottage. She could hear Mrs. Larkin calling.
Poppet! Poppet!
And knew she was looking for her over by the big house. So Bets slipped into the small cottage and looked round. She saw a few things that made her stare. The kitchen table was piled with tins of food. Big, expensive tins. How strange. Bets tiptoed into the bedroom. On the bed, neatly folded, were spotlessly clean blankets and an eiderdown. Before Bets could put Poppet down and run to Fatty, there came the sound of footsteps hurrying to the door. Bets turned. It was Mrs. Larkin in the same old red shawl, hideous wig and dark glasses.
Oh, you've got Poppet,
she said.
I thought she'd fallen in the river.
She took the little poodle from Bets, and the girl watched Poppet licking the woman's face.
Oh, you're kind to her now,
said Bets.
You weren't at first.
The woman put Poppet down at once.
Now you go,
she said harshly.
You shouldn't have walked in without permission.
I am going,
said Bets. The woman gave her a rough push. Bets ran out. She was puzzled. She waited till the door was shut, then she tiptoed back and peeped in at the window. The woman was putting a mat down under the dog's basket, with Poppet fussing round. Bets made her way back to the others, still puzzled. Why did Mrs. Larkin treat Poppet differently? Perhaps the Lorenzos had promised them a lot of money if Poppet was kept happy. That must be it. Bet told her tale to the others.
Great big tins, nice blankets and rugs,
She said.
I didn't get anything much out of the woman, though. She was so cross and she pushed me out. What do we do now?
Asked Pip. No one had any ideas.
Anyway, I'm glad that horrid Mrs. Larkin is so much nicer to dear little Poppet,
Said Bet.
Honestly, she might be Mrs. Lorenzo the way she fusses her now. She was even putting a rug down under Poppet's basket when I peeped in at the window.
Fatty suddenly gave such a terrific whoop that they all looked at him in surprise.
Gosh, what's up, Fatty?
Bets asked.
Don't speak to me for a minute.
Said Fatty in a peculiar voice. Bets looked at him in alarm.
Are you ill?
No. I've just got an idea, that's all. Something you said rang a bell in my mind. Now, just leave me alone for a minute.
Said Fatty urgently. The others were quite mystified. Goodness, what could he be thinking of?
The great brain's working overtime.
Said Pip.
What could have struck him so suddenly?
He'll say he's solved everything in a minute, said Ern. You see if he doesn't. He's a wonder, he is. Fatty suddenly looked extremely happy.
I've got it!
He said.
I've solved the whole thing. All tied up neatly, ready to lay at the superintendent's feet. Oh, gosh, I've been a mutt. So have we all.
I told you so, said Ern triumphantly, looking round at the others. I said he was solving everything, didn't I, Bets?
But what have you solved?
Said Pip.
Not everything, surely. I think so. I'm not quite certain about one thing.
Said Fatty.
However, we'll soon know. Oh, tell us.
Begged Larry.
It's frightful not knowing what you're talking about. Do tell us. No time.
Said Fatty, riding fast.
I must get to a telephone box immediately. Now buck up, all of you.
They all took their bicycles and rode behind Fatty in a terrific state of excitement. Fatty pedalled furiously as if he was in a race. Fatty leapt off his bicycle at the nearest telephone kiosk. He dashed in, shut the door and dialed a number. The others congregated outside in wonder, watching his every movement. After talking for a couple of minutes, he rang off and put back the receiver, his face glowing. He rubbed his hands in glee before he stepped out of the kiosk.
Oh, Fatty, you might tell us what's up.
Said Pip.
It's too bad seeing you shouting into that phone and not hearing a word you were saying. Whatever's happened so suddenly? I'll tell you as soon as I can.
Said Fatty, wheeling his bicycle into the road.
Come on, we've got to get back to the wicket gate leading to the Larkins' cottage. The chief will be there as soon as possible. Gosh, so that's who you've been ringing.
Said Larry, cycling madly after Fatty.
Is he really coming over?
They set off again and came to the river path, where they had to get off and wheel their bicycles.
Better not gather round the wicket gate all in a bunch,
Said Fatty in a low voice when they got there.
Let's go up the river path a little way. Hello? Who's this coming?
It was Mr. Goon. He saw the children further up the path and scowled.
You clear off, he called to them. And keep hold of that there dog. What are you doing there, crowding up the pathway?
We're just waiting for someone,
Said Fatty calmly.
Oh, yes,
Said Mr. Goon rudely.
and who may you be waiting for, I'd like to know? Your friend the superintendent, perhaps? You just clear off.
Actually, yes, we are waiting for him.
Said Fatty.
That was a clever guess of yours, Mr. Goon.
Now, don't you try to stuff me up with your superintendent jinx, said Goon most sarcastically. He's miles from here. That I do know, for he telephoned me himself this morning.
Well, you don't need to wait and see him.
Said Fatty.
He's coming to see us, actually.
Mr. Goon went slowly purple.
Telling me fairy tales like that, he said. You clear off, I say.
There came the sound of a car in the distance. It stopped. a car door slammed.
Here he is,
said Fatty to Goon as quick footsteps came up the river path. Mr. Goon swung round and his mouth fell open. It was Superintendent Jenks, tall and broad-shouldered as ever, followed by another man. He grinned at Fatty.
"Well," he said, "here I am."
Good morning, sir,
said Fatty. Mr. Goon was quite tongue-tied, and he couldn't say a word. The chief nodded to Fatty and then to Goon.
"Good morning, Frederick. Well, Goon, you here too? I didn't expect to see you as well."
He came along by accident, sir.
said Fatty.
All the others are here too.
The chief saluted all of them solemnly, and they saluted back.
"Well now, let's get down to business,"
said the chief.
"You telephoned to say that you've got this Lorenzo business nicely tied up. Do you mean you know where the Lorenzos are?"
Yes, sir,
said Fatty at once, and Goon's eyes nearly fell out of his head. He stared at Fatty and swallowed hard. That boy, that toad of a boy, how could he know where the Lorenzos were? The chief laughed at the expression on Goon's face.
"Aren't you in on this too, Goon?"
he said. Goon shook his head. He didn't dare to trust himself to speak. The chief turned back to Fatty.
"Well, where are the Lorenzos?"
he said.
"As you brought me over here, I imagine they're hiding in this district?"
Yes, sir.
said Fatty.
They are hiding in the Larkins' cottage.
"That they're not!" burst out Goon. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I have gone through that cottage 3 times. There is no one here but the 2 Larkins. I am ready to swear to that."
Well, the Lorenzos are there.
said Fatty.
Come along, Chief, I'll show you.
He led the way, the others following in wonder. What kind of a hiding place were the Lorenzos in? It must be a very small one. Goon went along too, angry and disbelieving. Fatty rapped at the Larkins' door. It was opened by old Larkin himself, cap on head as usual, and dirty old scarf round his throat. He peered through his thick glasses at Fatty.
"What do you want?"
he said. Then he saw the rest of the children and the tall superintendent of police, and made as if to shut the door quickly. But Fatty put his foot in at once.
We're coming in,
he said. The man that the chief had brought with him held open the door, and everyone filed in, even Buster. Mrs. Larkin was not in the room. They could hear her out in the little kitchen, rattling pans and crockery.
"What's all this?"
said Larkin gruffly.
"I ain't done nothing."
The little room was very crowded with so many people in it. Larkin shrank back.
Now, sir, here's one of the Lorenzos,
said Fatty. And suddenly he snatched off old Larkin's cap. Then with a quick twist he stripped off the man's beard and tore off his shaggy eyebrows. Off came the thick glasses too. At once Larkin became a much younger man, an angry man and a frightened one.
"Ooh,"
whistled the superintendent, astounded.
"Bill Lorenzo. Well, you may be a 4th-rate film actor, but you're a first-class fraud, masquerading as old Larkin.
I saw you myself at the beginning of this case, and I could have sworn you were old Bob Larkin."
Oh, he wasn't Bob Larkin at first.
said Fatty.
Not for some time. The real Mr. and Mrs. Larkin were here at first. Here comes the other one, sir.
Mrs. Larkin, hearing voices, had opened the kitchen door and stood there staring in fright with little Poppet in her arms. Before she could shut the door, Fatty had stepped behind her.
And here's Mrs. Lorenzo,
he said, and twitched off the extraordinary wig. Underneath it was pale golden hair, wavy and thick. She took off her dark glasses and looked defiantly at the surprised chief.
All right. I'm Gloria Lorenzo, and glad to get out of that filthy old wig of Mrs. Larkin's.
She turned to her husband.
Bill, the game's up.
The man nodded. It was surprising how the years fell off both of them once they had taken their glasses off, their own hair exposed and stood up straight instead of stooping. How could anyone have thought they were old and ugly?
A marvellous disguise.
said Fatty, in great admiration.
And you both got away with it too. Nobody had any suspicions at all that you were here instead of the Larkins.
Where are the Larkins? inquired the chief, looking all round as if they were there too. Are they all right?
Well, sir, the real Larkins were left here in charge of Poppet, as you know.
said Fatty.
And they weren't kind to her at all. Then one night, the Lorenzos hired a motor launch at Maidenhead and took it down the river. It stopped in midstream opposite the boathouse here.
How do you know all this? asked Bill Lorenzo angrily. Has anyone split on us?
No.
said Fatty. He turned to the chief.
Ern heard noises in the night, sir, and I put two and two together, sir. You see, about the motor launch, I mean.
Go on, said the superintendent, listening intently.
Well, my guess is that the Lorenzos and the Larkins changed clothes,
said Fatty.
The Lorenzos stayed behind in the cottage, and the Larkins went back to the launch and were, whisked off somewhere safe. Probably paid quite a bit of money too.
I see it all, said the chief, glancing at the two sullen Lorenzos. A very astute idea, to come back into the heart of things where nobody would possibly be looking for them.
Oh, yes, very smart, sir,
said Fatty.
And as they're both actors and used to making themselves up and acting all kinds of characters, it was easy to imitate the old Larkins.
What made you really stumble on the whole thing? asked the chief.
Well, sir, it was really something that Bet said that rang a bell in my mind. And, everything was as plain as daylight.
Oh, well, whatever did I say?
said Betts in wonder.
You said, I'm glad that horrid Mrs. Larkin is so much nicer to dear little Poppet. She might be Mrs. Lorenzo the way she fusses her now. And immediately I saw it all. The fuss she made of Poppet, the taking of the tins and the blankets. It was all easy after that,
said Fatty modestly. Well, I'm blessed, said the chief. You've sold some things in your time, Frederick, but this beats the lot. It really does. What do you say, Goon? Goon said absolutely nothing at all. He was in a complete fog. He wished he was anywhere but where he was. You've done a remarkably fine piece of detection, Frederick, said the chief warmly. I congratulate you. We'll soon make them tell us where the stolen picture is. The Lorenzos were taken to the car, carefully escorted by a rather green-faced and very silent Goon and the big sergeant. Poppet barked a goodbye to Buster, who had been held tightly in Bet's arms all the time.
Oh, dear little Poppet,
said Betts, almost in tears.
She oughtn't to belong to horrible people like that.
Cheer up, said the chief. She'll be well looked after. Frederick, I think this remarkable feat of yours deserves a celebration. You've surpassed yourself, my boy. My word, how I shall enjoy myself when you come to work for me.
Thank you, sir,
said Fatty modestly.
May I suggest, sir, that as it's rather cold, we all go to my shed and celebrate there. I know our cook's making mince pies today, sir, and, I've got a few things I'd like to show you.
And so, off they all went, Ern too. What a morning. We can't follow them, alas. The shed door is shut, and there is a fine smell of mince pies on the air. Hey, Fatty, don't wait too long for another mystery, will you?